in the development program. When I joined the World Bank, I mean, we had lots of Bible studies in the World Bank, and lots of Islamic prayer groups and Hindu prayer groups and Christian Bible studies. So there was never an issue about a lack of personal engagement, but it was not an acceptable topic to discuss when you talked about the development endeavor. That's changed. You've understood this for years and years and years, but it's taken us quite a long time. So, for example, now, as director of the World Bank, it is essential that I meet with Islamic organizations in Indonesia, just as it is that I meet with, say, government departments. Why? Because the two largest Islamic organizations in Indonesia, one's called NU, one's called Muhammadiyah, each have 40 million members. And if we want to do something on the environment, it is far more effective to get environmental messages sent down to those who are going to be preaching on a Friday in the mosque than it is to have the best discussions with the Minister of Environment or the President of the country. Again, the emphasis on getting results. And why does religion matter? Because it's the same point I was trying to make on environment. Governments don't solve the problem. Problems get solved when hearts and attitudes and actions change. And attitudes and actions come much more strongly from the heart and from faith. And so a lot more people do a lot more things on environment because they believe it's right, rather than because they're told by the government that they must do it. So there's we, for example, have just brought out a book, a World Bank book on faith and the environment, looking at all of the faiths on the environment. A lot of other people have done similar types of books, but for us to do it was important because it was a statement we were making about the importance of it. Similarly, for example, in education, I mean, I have to talk with the head of one of these Islamic organizations as often as I do the Minister of Education. Why? Because so much of education is through the pasantrans and the madrasas, which are the religious schools. And if we want to have an impact on education, we have to impact that as well. So faith, and one of the wonderful things about living in an Islamic country is that faith is so openly discussed, and it also forces the Christians to talk very openly. So I've never lived in a country, it's the largest Islamic country in the world, I've never lived in a country where there's so much prayer in public, both Islamic and Christian. It's absolutely amazing. I went recently to a meeting where a vice minister who happened to be a Christian wanted to say a prayer before the meeting, and we sang a hymn. And I'm standing next to another vice minister who's a Muslim, and he's got the hymn book open. And it's really sort of taught me about how important it is to speak out for what you really believe, because it's far more important than anything else. You've been doing it all your lives. The only reason I'm mentioning it is because it's changing us, and you're changing us. And I would encourage you to really speak out as believers wherever you are. You might think it's odd, but it really isn't, and I know you're doing it already. And how we pray that the Christian community would have a voice much stronger than today on environment, and how encouraging to hear Ron Sider speak today about the potential role that these Christian leaders might have on the climate change issue. One issue that we're working with the Islamic groups in Indonesia on is corruption. I mean, Indonesia is one of the most corrupt countries on earth. The government simply cannot heal itself. But if you got these 40 million in each of these two, that's 80 million people committed to an anti-corruption campaign. And so too, Christians need to take the same role. Okay, so that's... By the way, one thing, some of you as Christians in microfinance and NGOs, you might think of yourselves as tent makers. I bet you sometimes use that phrase, tent makers, because that's what the Apostle Paul, of course, did, making tents. This has nothing to do with what I was saying, but it suddenly struck me this afternoon that the Apostle Paul was working for a micro-enterprise. He was working in a tent-making micro-enterprise. But the other thing that struck me, this has nothing to do with anything, is that we would never have financed it. We wouldn't. And the reason for that is, you heard all about leather tanning today. Leather tanning is one of the most horrible things in the world. Tents were made of leather. The Apostle Paul, while he was writing these letters, was working in a micro-enterprise, and he was doing the most unpleasant things imaginable. It involved taking the flesh off the skin of the animal and drying it, and using all kinds of, whether they had chemicals in those days, I don't know, but it made me think, well, I don't know what I thought, but it struck me anyway, and it struck me that he went through that, and we hope not too many other people have to go through such environmentally unsustainable activities. So